On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me the most successful non-conference in Gonzaga history.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Well, folks, it is Christmas Eve as many of you are listening to this show. It is our final episode before Christmas, as we will skip the holiday and come back for you all on Boxing Day. But we figured it's a good time to celebrate the holiday and have a Christmas-themed episode. This will be, I think, the third year in a row doing something Christmassy here for the final episode before the break. And we've done a Christmas gift list where we said, what gifts would we get Mark Few this year or Drew Timme this year or so-and-so. We've done comparing Gonzaga players to various Christmas characters like Santa and the Grinch and Buddy the Elf and various other things. So we thought this year, let's try to do it a little bit differently. We're doing 12 days of Christmas. And what that means is that we're going to talk about 12 different numbers. The number 12, all the way down 12, 11, 10, 9 in the first segment, 8, 7, 6, 5 in the second segment, picking various stats or something that correlates with that number for Gonzaga now that we are through the non-conference portion of the season. Kind of a fun way to look back at that half of the year and how Gonzaga has done so far. So again, we're starting counting backwards from 12, starting at number 12. That's an easy one. 12 is the number of wins Gonzaga got in their non-conference slate. 12-1, the record for Gonzaga. Of course, we're used to seeing Gonzaga have a lot of success in the non-conference. They were a little shaky the last couple of years, particularly last year, where they just could not get a W over some of those close games. But what we saw from Gonzaga this year was not only a prolific 12-1 record out of those 13 games, but it was complete and utter dominance and against a very high level quality of opponent. 4 of Gonzaga's 13 total games were bye games. Those are when you bring a team to the McCarthy Athletic Center that's outside the top 200, 250, 300 in many cases at KenPom, and they're just there to be a team that you get to beat. Like that's they're getting paid, they're traveling across the country, you play them, you secure your W, and you move on with your life. That's what bye games are. Gonzaga usually has 5, 6 sometimes of those games on the schedule. This year, just 4 out of their 13 games. Gonzaga obliterated those 4 opponents, but their 8 other wins all come against power conference teams. Every single one of them. 3 wins over SEC teams, that's Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Alabama. 3 wins over the Big Ten, that's Maryland, UCLA, and Oregon. A win over a Big 12 team in Arizona State, and a win over a Big East team in Creighton. And again, the loss to Michigan, obviously horrendous. 40-point loss, really put a damper on what was otherwise an incredible non-conference performance overall for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Few talked about this after the game on Sunday against Oregon. He was asked about this and basically said, I think this is the toughest non-conference that we've ever, like the best performance we've ever had. And he's like, I know we've had seasons where we were undefeated, like all the way up until the very end. But, he mentioned the COVID season. They didn't get to play as many quality opponents as they wanted to. Granted, they still beat Kansas and Iowa and Virginia and a bunch of other good teams that year. And in 2016-17, their non-conference was also quite competitive and they won a lot of good games there. But in terms of quality of opponent and margin of victory, I mean, again, a layup by Dedrick Lindsey in the closing seconds of Gonzaga's most recent game is the only reason Gonzaga didn't win every single game that they played this non-conference by 10 or more points, because they only beat Oregon by 9, technically. Really dominant performance. That goes right into number 11, which is the number of games Gonzaga won by 10 or more points. I think that's such an important part of this conversation for good and for bad. I think for Gonzaga, obviously, from a metrics perspective, the net is incredibly valuable. KenPom is incredibly valuable. These are tools, Bart Torvik's T-Rank. These are tools that are used by the selection committee to determine seeding in the NCAA tournament, and they factor in margin of victory. Obviously, the real humans looking at the data are going to parse out what some of that means more than just general computers are going to be able to give you. And like, I know that, a 72-point win over Southern Utah is not going to carry as much weight as a 10-point win over Alabama, nor should it. But it's relevant that Gonzaga has beaten most of the teams they've played by a lot. They beat Oregon by 9. They beat UCLA and Alabama by 10 each. They beat Arizona State by 12 in a true road game. Oklahoma by 15. Everybody else by 20 plus. Smacked Maryland, beat Creighton by 27 points. I mean, just have been blowing teams out throughout the season up to this point. And that's going to help them from a metrics perspective. I think there's a conversation that could be had about if Gonzaga needs to experience like a close down to the wire game, something they experienced way too many of last year. Unfortunately, never really figured out a way to get a win in those games. That's why there was agonizing against Kentucky and West Virginia and UCLA and UConn and St. Mary's and Houston. But this year, they haven't really dealt with that. Now, it was close against Bama. It was close against UCLA. It's close-ish against Oregon. Gonzaga never felt out of control, and they did what they needed to do in the final minutes of those games to get a W. So I kind of push back on the narrative that, Gonzaga's not ready for that kind of game. Like, they have a really deep, really experienced team. I think they're going to be ready for that. But yeah, it's a reasonable take to say, well, they haven't really had to experience it in the way that many other teams have. And there's a chance they won't experience it in conference play outside of, maybe the road game against St. Mary's or even the home game against St. Mary's. Randy Bennett and the Gales are going to bring it as they always do against Gonzaga this year. Number 10 in our 12 days of Christmas. 10 is the number of games Gonzaga has had 10 or more offensive rebounds this season. Only 3 games where they did not. That would be Arizona State, where they had 9, UCLA, where they had 9, and Southern Utah, their weakest game from an offensive rebounding perspective, where they had just 8. Turns out when you pretty much don't miss any shots, it's hard to get a lot of offensive rebounds. That's what happened in that Southern Utah game. It was lay-in after lay-in after lay-in. They had 18 steals. They were just getting out in transition. So you can't really blame them for not getting a lot of offensive rebounds when there weren't a lot of offensive rebounds to be had. Gonzaga has dominated on the offensive glass this season. They have had 3 games where they had exactly 17 offensive boards. And you might be thinking, okay, I'm sure a bunch of bye games. Well, yeah, Texas Southern was one of them, but so was Oklahoma. And so is Alabama. 2 SEC teams considered the toughest, deepest league in college basketball. And Gonzaga's grabbing 17 offensive boards against 2 of them. That is ridiculous. This team is outstanding on the glass. Their 37.2% rate of offensive rebounds, according to KenPom, that's 37th best in college basketball. A couple of standout performers in this category. Braden Huff is getting offensive rebounds 10.4% of the time. That's the 231st best mark in college basketball. And you're thinking, 231st doesn't sound good. Remember, we're talking about players. There are thousands upon thousands of players in college basketball. Being in the top 250 for offensive rebounds, that's pretty darn good. He's not top on Gonzaga, though. The top player for the Zags is actually Tyon Grant Foster. I've been talking a lot about Tyon lately. I know there's been a little bit of frustration about his performance, specifically scoring and kind of his fit in the offense. But one of the things we talked about a lot with him is how great he is defensively. But it's worth noting he's a tremendous offensive rebounder as well. 12.3%. That's 134th. Again, top 150 player in the country in terms of offensive rebounding rate. Jalen Warley is at 8.1%, which is just inside the top 500, which is where the cutoff is for KenPom's data. So Jalen Warley, 468th in the country in terms of offensive rebounding rate. Number 9 for our 12 days of Christmas. 9 is the number of players for Gonzaga playing between 17 and 28 minutes per game. And I know that sounds like a bit of an arbitrary cutoff, but really it's basically just who's in Gonzaga's rotation. So often Gonzaga plays 8-man rotation. Often we see that rotation shrink down to being a 7-player rotation. 9 is fairly rare. And it's still possible that the rotation shrinks a little bit as the season goes on, but I'm not sure where that's going to happen because all 9 of these players that are in Gonzaga's rotation have value. They are contributing positively to this team. They have a specific role laid out for them. It's kind of hard to imagine anybody falling out of those rotation, barring obviously injuries or sudden changes to performance or things of that nature. I mean, again, one of the big preseason bold predictions that I made on the show is that Gonzaga will, for the first time in Mark Few's entire tenure as Gonzaga's head coach, they will not have a player average 30 minutes per game. So far, that looks very likely to happen. Graham Ike is leading this team in minutes per game at 27.7. He's not even at 28 minutes per game. Huff is next at 24.9. They only have one player over 25 minutes per game in Ike. And then Mario's at 21.7, and Achente's at 20.2. Tyon's at 19.8. Warley's at 19.5. Miller's at 18.1. Smith's at 18. And Steele Venters, despite being a starter for most of the year, is the lowest at 17.7. But again, the difference between your 9th most minutes per game and your 4th most minutes per game is basically just 2 minutes. That's the difference. These guys are all playing a similar amount. And again, you might be thinking like, oh, well, with so many bye games or so, they're just playing everybody 20-ish minutes per game because they can. It's like, well, that's not. Gonzaga's played 8 power conference teams, and they're still able to roll out a 9-man rotation pretty consistently. And that's without Davis Vogel playing very much, which has been a source of frustration for many fans out there, as we alluded to a lot on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Zags. So this is a really deep team. And more than that, it's nice to see Mark Few utilizing that depth. We've talked a lot every year. It seems like we have the conversation of Gonzaga's got 9 or 10 guys. How on earth are they going to shrink this rotation? And every year they do. Well, this year they haven't. We thought Davis Vogel and Ismaila Diani could end up in the rotation, and they're not, but we didn't think it would ever be deeper than 9. And this year it's very clearly at 9, and it's hard to imagine that slowing down. I have to think that Gonzaga's ability to compete for a national championship and be ready for the rigors of March and 2 games in 3 days and having to kind of quick turnarounds, the fact that they're this deep and this versatile is a huge advantage for them going into the WCC and, of course, going into the tournament as well. We got thoughts on the West Coast Conference's national perception, where Gonzaga is ranked, and Braden Huff's ridiculous scoring streak. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. Maybe a receiver gets hot, maybe a defense tightens up, maybe the momentum flips after a key turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into those moments. Their live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as players heat up. You can bet next touchdown scorer, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. Gonzaga's at plus 250 right now to make the Final Four. I was going to pull you Wooden Award odds. Graham Ike's at plus 10,000, folks. They don't even have Wooden Award odds on Braden Huff. If you ever find any, and they're plus 25K, something like that, it might be worth tossing a couple bucks down. You never know. We're going to talk more about Huff here in just a second. But folks, if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network. And we are still going through 12 days of Christmas here, 12 days of ZAG-MAS, if you will, as we're just having a little fun here with the final show before the Christmas break. We'll be back, of course, right after Christmas, getting you ready for Gonzaga's game against Pepperdine to open up conference play. We've gone through 12, 11, 10, and 9. Now, number 8 in our 12 days of Christmas. 8 is where the WCC ranks right now among college basketball conferences, according to KenPom's net rating metric. This is one of, if not the most valuable rating metric that exists for comparing conferences across each other. Obviously, you can do head-to-head, but that's not very valuable. If Boston College played UConn and UConn smashed them, that does not mean that the Big East is better than the ACC, for example. But what the net rating metric does, it effectively takes the average 500 team in conference play, a team that they would expect to go exactly 500, and compares that to the average 500 team in other conferences. The WCC comes in at number 8. Behind the 5 power conferences, which are in order, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the ACC, and the Big East. Incidentally, little surprised the SEC is still at number 1. I think the Big 10 and, frankly, the Big 12 have been better than the SEC, but there's a lot of depth in the SEC, so it makes sense that it might think that a 500 team's a little bit better. I'm a little skeptical on that. After the Power 5, the Mountain West is at number 6, the Atlantic 10 is at number 7, and then the WCC comes in at number 8. This is about where the WCC typically is. Usually it's the Power 5, the Mountain West, and then either the WCC or the A10 right in that range. The American at times has been in that conversation, but they have been rated lately with Houston and Cincy going to the Big 12, among others. At this point, that conference is pretty much just Memphis, especially now that FAU is no longer a considerable threat following Dusty May's move to Michigan. So not surprised to see the WCC around number 8. We've seen the conference, obviously hoped for more from Washington State and Oregon State in the 2 years that they are in the league. They're actively dragging down the conference's perception nationally, which is a bummer, as you'd expect the two schools that institutionally are far bigger, that have had recent success. I mean, the WCC or Washington State joined the WCC coming off of an NCAA tournament appearance. Oregon State made the Final Four a few years ago. Yeah, that was a weird fluke, but it's still a fact that happened. And yet those two teams kind of dragging down the league, unfortunately. But shout out Seattle U. Got to give some love to my other alma mater. Seattle U has wins over Stanford, at Stanford, and Washington. That game was in Seattle. Technically, it was a home game for Seattle U, but it was at Climate Pledge Arena. Not really a home game for either team, but Seattle U, those are two massive wins for them. They're playing excellent basketball right now. Great to see them doing well. Santa Clara did what they always do, looked great in November, flopped in December with some ugly losses. Part of the reason that the WCC is behind the Mountain West is because Santa Clara loses to New Mexico, and then St. Mary's recent loss to Boise State, certainly not helping the comparison with that conference in particular. Gonzaga is still going to be in better shape when they move to the Pac-12, even with Oregon State and Washington State struggling, and San Diego State for that matter, but Utah State, Boise State, Colorado State really going to help make the new look Pac-12 a better destination for the Zags, but not seeing anything too dramatically bad for the WCC right now. Number 7 in our 12 days of Christmas. 7 is where the Zags are ranked in the most recent AP poll. It's the highest they've been ranked this season. They have steadily climbed from their 21 preseason ranking. They were 19, then 13, then 11, then I think 10, then 8, then 7. Like they've just steadily moved up the rankings. They actually moved up after the 40-point loss to Michigan, because that same week they had also beat Alabama and Maryland. So it bumped them up one spot, and they have stayed in that conversation consistently since then. Feels about right. This feels about where they should be at number 7. You have some undefeated teams ahead of you, Arizona, Michigan being among them. You also have this group of one-loss teams, and Gonzaga is kind of right in the middle of those one-loss teams. UConn, Duke, and Purdue are the 3 one-loss teams ahead of Gonzaga in the AP poll, where Houston, Michigan State, and BYU are all one-loss teams just behind Gonzaga. And I think Gonzaga is probably about in the right spot here. I think you can make an argument for Gonzaga ahead of Purdue, but Purdue recently just picked up a really nice W for them. They beat Auburn by 28 points, I think, the same day that Gonzaga only beat Oregon by 10. It's the win's a win, but obviously metrically that's going to help Purdue. So Gonzaga's overall win equity is better than Purdue's. Gonzaga's loss is worse, although Purdue's loss is a 23-point loss at home to Iowa State. So not exactly a great loss for them either. But it's nitpicky. It's nitpicky to argue them against Purdue. I wouldn't argue them against UConn or Duke. They both have better resumes. So Gonzaga is about in the right spot at number 7, keeping them in that number 2 seed conversation. Number 6 in our 12 days of Christmas. 6 is where Coach Few ranks among active head coaches in wins. And I bring this up because Mark Few, it's another storyline that has come up the past week or so. Mark Few is once again eligible for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in the class of 2026. He was a first-time eligible first-time eligible candidate in 2025. That was the first time, because you have to have gone 25 years after you started your coaching career, I believe is the metric that they use. Few was not one of the 17 finalists among all of the candidates in 2025, but 9 of those 17 finalists, which includes some really great play, Maya Moore, Sylvia Fowles, Sue Bird on the WNBA, Dwight Howard and Carmelo Anthony on the men's side. Billy Donovan was the coach that went in the 2025 class. So 9 of those 17 finalists are now in the Hall of Fame. And the new class coming in, the new first-year candidates in 2026, not nearly as strong as it was last year. You have Kelvin Sampson and Bruce Pearl. You have Candace Parker. She's likely going to get in. You have Blake Griffin, Elena Deladon, Jamal Crawford, some good players, some very famous players and talented athletes and coaches, but nobody that feels like a super shoe-in except maybe Parker. So Gonzaga's coach Mark Few's got a chance. He's got a chance to at least be a finalist this year. Now, I will not bury the lead any longer. 6th is where he is among active coaches, the ones that are ahead of him: Rick Pitino, John Calipari, Rick Barnes, Bill Self, and Dana Altman. Believe it or not, Gonzaga's matchup with Oregon on Sunday was a matchup of the 5th and 6th most wins in college basketball among active coaches. Of those 5 coaches ahead of Mark Few, Pitino, Cal, and Self are all in the Hall of Fame. Barnes is on the ballot, as well as Mark Few for the Hall of Fame. Dana Altman not on the ballot. Curious if that will change for Altman. He has not had as much postseason success, but he has been around for a really long time. Mark Few is going to be a Hall of Famer. I don't know if it'll happen this year, next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. I don't know when it'll happen. Certainly, he could make that process a lot speedier by winning a national championship. I could almost guarantee you that the year he wins a national championship, the next year he will get into the Hall of Fame. That feels very likely to me if it does happen that way. 754 career wins, 21st all time, again, 6th among active coaches. He's got a really good chance of being in there sooner rather than later, something we're definitely keeping an eye on. Number 5 in our 12 days of Christmas. 5 is the number of consecutive games that Braden Huff has scored 20 or more points. He has been nuclear the last couple of weeks for Gonzaga, really all season long, but in particular over these last 5 games, which again, that includes Kentucky, UCLA, and Oregon, not just a bunch of gimme games for Gonzaga and for Braden Huff. He has dominated this season, averaging 19.1 points per game. He is shooting 71.3% on 2-point shots, 71% from 2, and that's him taking over 10 per game. It's not a small volume thing where, you go 4 of 4 every game from 2 because you get a couple of lobs. There's a lot of guys in college basketball who shoot 78, 80, 85% from 2 because they're only taking a couple of them a game. Huff is not only he's taking more than a couple. Huff is leading the country. He has made 107 2-point shots this season. That is the most in all of college basketball. The most prolific 2-point scorer in the sport. Again, Evan Miyakawa's tremendous website does a stat called scoring volume, which predicts how many points you would score per 100 possessions. Huff is at 37. That is the top mark in the sport, ahead of JT Toppin at Texas Tech, ahead of Cam Boozer at Duke, and AJ DeBansa and Graham Ike and ahead of everybody. Yaxel Lendeberg, Trey Kaufman-Wren, Nate Biddle, go on and on and on and on. Braden Huff is the most effective, efficient scorer on a per-possession basis in college basketball, and that's with him shooting 27% from 3 and 58% from the free throw line. He is so good at his touch around the rim is great. His footwork is great. His little 10, 15-foot push shot seems impossible to stop. He doesn't even hit the rim on that shot. It is just absolute butter every single time. Been really fun to watch him develop into an absolute scoring machine for Gonzaga this year. Well, folks, where's Gonzaga projected to land in the NCAA tournament? We're going to talk about that and how many more games they are projected to lose this season. That and more with our final 4 days of Christmas coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show, closing out our Christmas-themed episode here with our final 4 of our 12 days of Christmas. We've done 12 through 5, talked all sorts of fun things, talked about the WCC, talked about Braden Huff's scoring, talked about Coach Few's legacy, talked about the rotation depth for Gonzaga this year. And now we got 4 more data points to talk about here to close out the show. Number 4 in our 12 days of Christmas, 4 is the number of players on Gonzaga's roster averaging 1 or more steals per game. You have 3 guys averaging 1.5 steals. That's Jalen Warley, and then the 2-point guards, Braden Smith and Mario St-Superi. Technically, Jalen Warley is the leader. He has 20 steals on the season, whereas Smith and Mario each have 19. Steel Venters has 13 steals in 13 games, putting him at 1.0 steals per game. Gonzaga has been outstanding defensively. Not just from like a steals perspective. Again, they're 53rd in the country with 8.8 steals per game. Certainly not bad, but also not like in the elite category. And then if you rate that out a little bit more, 115 total steals puts them 46th in the country. 7.9% steal rate, according to KenPom, is 40th. So they're a very, very good team in terms of generating steals and capitalizing on them out in transition. But it's more just for Gonzaga, it's not just getting the steals, it's how good they've been at limiting good shot opportunities. And then again, taking advantage. When you do get the steal, do you get out in transition? Do you capitalize by getting easy points at the rim? And we've seen Gonzaga do that extremely well. And obviously, it's fair to point out that a lot of Gonzaga's best games in terms of generating steals have been in those bye games. I mean, they had a ridiculous school record 18 steals against Southern Utah, which is just absurd. That's how you win a game by 72 points, though, is if you just get steal after steal after steal. They also had 12 steals against North Florida and Campbell, but they also had 12 steals against Maryland. Maryland, admittedly, not the best of the power conference teams Gonzaga has played, quite possibly the worst out of the power conference teams that Gonzaga has played, but still, anytime you get 12 steals against a Big Ten team, especially when you played less than 24 hours previously, you got to feel pretty good about that. It's been great to see Gonzaga playing a lot of pressure defense. We saw Tyon Grant-Foster at the front of Gonzaga's press, like half-court press they're running against Oregon. They've generated a ton of takeaways and, again, have capitalized on those really well this year. Number 3 in our 12 days of Christmas. 3 is the number of quad 1 wins Gonzaga has for now. And I say that because just a few days ago, Gonzaga had 4 quad 1 wins. And the only reason they lost one was because Arizona State got beat by WCC program. Oregon State, shockingly, has not been good this year, but they went to Tempe and picked up a W against Bobby Hurley and the Sun Devils. That bumped Arizona State outside of the top 75 in the net rankings because Gonzaga played them on the road. All Arizona State needs to do is be in the top 75 for that to count as a quad 1 win for the Zags. So since they're not there right now, it's not a quad 1 win, but Gonzaga's got those quad 1 wins over Kentucky, over UCLA, and over Alabama. And all those teams feel pretty likely to stay in the quad 1 space. They all need to be top 50 because they were all neutral site games. UCLA is 40th right now, so they are far and away the closest. But I'm not that worried about UCLA. They're in the Big Ten. They're going to play a tough schedule. I'm sure they're going to drop a game or two that they shouldn't drop because the schedule's a nightmare and traveling is hard. But I think they're going to win enough games that they're going to stay in the top 50. All that to say, it's been a couple of years since we've been able to feel pretty comfortable going into WCC play with where Gonzaga's resume is at. It took until February when Gonzaga went to Rupp Arena to beat Kentucky a few years ago for Gonzaga to even have a single quad 1 game. And then last year, they kept losing those agonizing games, like we said, to Kentucky, to West Virginia, to UCLA, and just didn't have a resume that put them in a really comfortable spot. And we talked about the WCC earlier, and unfortunately, because some of those teams are struggling, there are not a lot of quad 1 opportunities left for Gonzaga. As of right now, it's just 2. It's the home game against St. Mary's and the road game against St. Mary's. And that home game against St. Mary's is in a precarious spot as the Gales are 28th, and they need to be top 30 for that to be a quad 1 home game for Gonzaga. So it's not out of the question that Gonzaga may only have 1 or 2 quad 1 games left. Again, if they play St. Mary's in the WCC championship game, that'll likely be quad 1 as well. But we're not as worried about it. We don't have to stress because Gonzaga's already got 3 of them in the bag, 3 good ones as well. Like, no, sometimes your quad 1 game is like, oh, we played a mid-major team that's 71st in the net on the road. And it's like, okay, that doesn't really carry the same weight as like Bama or UCLA or obviously all of their non-conference. I mean, Kentucky, we'll see how Kentucky ends up aging, but I think that's going to be fine. Certainly Alabama is going to be great. I think UCLA is going to be great as well. Arizona State could sneak into that conversation. I don't think Oklahoma or Creighton are particularly close to sneaking into quad 1, but they're comfortably in the quad 2 territory. Oregon right now is quad 3, but I think they will end up being a quad 2 win for Gonzaga as well. Number 2 in our 12 days of Christmas, that would be the day I'm recording this, the 23rd. 2 is also where Joe Lunardi has Gonzaga projected in the NCAA tournament on the number 2 line. And I say Joe Lunardi, but pretty much everybody. Anybody right now who's doing bracketology projections has Gonzaga as a 2 seed. They're pretty comfortably outside of the top 4 spots, Arizona, Michigan in those conversations. And then you have UConn and Duke and Iowa State in the mix as well. But Gonzaga is pretty comfortably in that 2 spot. And most of the places are putting Gonzaga as a projected number 2 seed in the West region, where they would start in Portland, which would be incredible. How cool would it be to have Gonzaga back in Portland? They were in Portland as a number 1 seed back in 2022, the year that they had Chet Holmgren. They played Georgia Southern. They played Memphis in a game. They were down 10 at halftime, came back and won before Arkansas clipped them in the Sweet 16. The latest from Joe Lunardi has Gonzaga as a 2 seed in Portland, taking on 15 seed New Mexico State out of Conference USA. The 7-10 game in their region is Utah State versus Miami, would be very fun either way. Certainly Utah State would set up a nice kind of history between these two schools before they join the Pac-12 together in the 26-27 season. Regardless, we obviously don't know what the specific matchup's going to look like between now and March. Lots of things are going to change, but Gonzaga right now, at least, very comfortably in the conversation for a number 2 seed in the 2026 NCAA tournament. Number 1, our final day of Christmas. That is the number of projected losses for Gonzaga this year, according to KenPom. And if you're thinking, well, Gonzaga already has 1 loss. Yes, they do. KenPom's current data algorithm projects every single game going forward and does not project Gonzaga to lose a single game for the rest of the season. Now, that is individually. Each game individually has a projection where Gonzaga wins the basketball game. The overall model, because computer models can detect like, hey, just because we think he's going to win all 17 of these games individually doesn't mean we think that, somewhere along the line, they'll probably lose the game. And so the actual data for KenPom says that Gonzaga has a 36% chance of going undefeated from here on out. That's still pretty darn good. 36% chance of winning every game for the rest of the season. Again, it's according to the computer models, at least. Pretty darn good spot. The actual projected record is 29-2, which would be 17-1 in league play. Tell you what, if Gonzaga goes into the WCC tournament 29-2, I think we're all going to be pretty darn happy about that. Like, there's not, at this point already, barring a significant collapse in conference play, and for the record, a significant collapse for Gonzaga would be losing 3 games. Even 2 games would be like pretty not good for Gonzaga at this point. But again, the KenPom data shows Gonzaga has a 73% chance of beating St. Mary's on the road, an 87% chance of beating St. Mary's at home, an 89% chance of beating Santa Clara on the road. Every other game is over 90% chance of a victory for Gonzaga. Looking like we're feeling real good about Gonzaga's chances of being a 2-loss, maybe 1 loss. Worst case feels like a 3-loss team going into the WCC tournament. And again, that goes back to number 2 here, which puts Gonzaga pretty comfortably in the conversation as a 2 seed in March. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I hope you all have a fantastic, safe, fun, joyous holiday with your friends, with your family. Again, we'll be back with you all on sometime on Thursday. We'll have a show for you. And then on Friday, we'll have a show getting you ready for the start of conference play, which tips off on Sunday at 5 p.m. for Gonzaga in Malibu against the Pepperdine Waves. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day and week. And until next time, as always, go Zags.